I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and associate producer of Poured Over, and today I am so excited to be joined by Kate DiCamillo. I could probably list 7,000 things that you've written, 7,000 awards you've won. I know I want to talk about Because of Winn Dixie, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, Ferris, The Puppets of Spelhorst. There's so many great things that you've written and so many children's lives that you've enriched and expanded, and maybe also adults' lives that you've done the same thing. But thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your work.
Oh, well, I'm thrilled to be here. You know what I want to talk about? You as a reader, you as a young reader, because we were just talking backstage, as it were, about how much we met in January of this year, was it, when I was in the offices, and you told me a story that, can you tell that story, even though I'm not in charge here? You are?
Yeah. Absolutely. So when I was just a young person, and it must have been right around Winn Dixie's publication in 2000, I got my hands on a copy. I was probably in about second grade, maybe, and I read Because of Winn Dixie so many times the pages fell out. I would finish the book and then just go immediately back to the first page and start again. And I have long since credited that book with being the thing that turned me from a kid who loved books into a reader, and really into someone that cared and could understand the magic of what a book could do. And I think that opened so many doors for me to just read anything I could get my hands on.
It's so deeply moving to me to hear that and to hear it again. And I also like that you say that it opened so many doors for you, because I always think that's what reading can do. And I want to talk about doors in that book, which was my first book, because that book, Because Winn Dixie, was for me a doorway, a magical doorway into this whole world of not only writing, but writing for kids. And that book changed my life, and it moves me deeply to hear that it turns you into a reader.
The book changed my life too. I mean, as someone who now gets to do one of the greatest things in the world, which is talk about books all the time and think about books all the time, I don't know if I would have made it on this journey in that exact same way without that book.
You would have, but what an honor for me to get to be there and for us to walk through that door together.
I remember so vividly. I mean, obviously I'm a person who loves dogs, so I think that really drew me in right away. I always had dogs as a kid, but also sort of that grandmother character in Winn Dixie, that like connection, just one of the best things.
It's the beautiful thing about how a book can, I mean, this is what it does. This is what books do for me as a reader. It can make you feel seen. It can make you feel less alone. And it can actually almost physically hold you. It is a safe place, And when we keep on with that metaphor of walking through the door, it's just like we're a book that you walk into that safe space of that room where you're with people who make you feel seen and make you feel loved and safe.
And I think when you're a kid especially, there's nothing better than that experience of, for the first time for so many of us, having that moment where you realize the world is so big, and yet you're in it and you can connect to it and you can see it and it's reflected right there.
Yes. I say yes.
And Winn Dixie was a journey for you to write. It wasn't like you just sent out something in the first thing and you got it published right away. This was a process for you. There was a lot that went into writing and in your career. And I think that's also important for people to know.
Do you want me to tell that an abbreviated story of my journey?
I would love to hear that.
So I'll start with a very young me in college, and having a professor tell me that I should consider going to graduate school for writing. And I decided, oh, great, I'll just go be a writer and not bother with graduate school. I thought he was just kind of like telling me I was super talented. So that's how I spent my 20s, was, telling everybody I was a writer and dreaming about being a writer. and reading books on writing and wearing black turtlenecks and not writing anything. And then right before I turned 30, I had this sudden understanding that if I was going to be a writer, I would have to write something. I started writing, and I started where I think a lot of people start, which is short stories, thinking, oh, they're short, therefore they're easier. And I sent a lot of those short stories out to literary magazines and got a lot of rejection letters. But something else happened, which was miraculous, which was I moved to Minneapolis and I got a job in a book warehouse. And in that book warehouse, my job was I was a picker. I filled orders, and I was on the third floor. And the third floor was all children's books. And I started to read the books that I was picking. And I read The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, by Christopher Paul Curtis. And I was so moved by that book because it's so funny and so warm, and it deals with real tragedy. And I thought I want to try to do something like this. And so I kind of like started writing about a girl named Opal and a dog named Winn Dixie. So if I hadn't ended up on the third floor of that warehouse, it's kind of, I don't know if we would be, it's just so funny to me to think about that I was in the right place at the right time. And, you know, sometimes adults will say to me, when are you going to write a book for adults? And I just feel like writing books, these books for kids, is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And that I feel so lucky to have found it. So.
And there are so many kids that are lucky to have found those books. And I would also say to people who question, oh, when are you going to write a book for adults? I would say, you do. Who's to say that these adults can't go and read these books and that they don't come with us as we get older?
Right. Well, and increasingly, I have adults who, for lack of a better word, confess that to me, you know, so that adult book clubs will do the books. And, you know, it helped a lot when Ann Patchett, who's a friend of mine, wrote about reading the books and finding out that they were, for her, an adult reader, too. So. And that gave other adult readers the permission, I think, to embrace the books.
And there's so much for all of us, I think, to come back to. Like you were saying, the books that you write, they're not only just these fantastical and magical stories often, or stories of connection and hope and love, which they all are, but they also deal with some pretty challenging and heavy themes. You don't shy away from sort of the more difficult and the sometimes sad, sometimes, heartbreaking or angry, because I think for kids, they're craving that. They're looking for both of those things.
But it goes to that thing that we were talking about at the very beginning, where a book can make you feel seen. So, and it's so often what seems to happen with kids as they navigate their way through the world, the same world that adults are living in. People are telling them one thing, and they're seeing a world that is beautiful, yes, and really challenging too. And adults, for some reason, think that kids aren't aware of how much sadness and difficulty there is. And so that's so much what I remember as a kid, just always feeling so frustrated when I was condescended to, that, kind of patted on the head and, oh, everything's all, I wanted to be acknowledged as a human being in a difficult, beautiful world. And so while I don't sit down and write and think I need to put that in, I think the kid me is always there and is seeing all that complexity and wants it acknowledged that I'm seeing the complexity.
And that's how we learn how to understand our emotions and to see the full picture of what humanity can be. I mean, when we see it reflected back in literature, I promise I'll talk about things other than Winn Dixie, but I remember reading about melancholy for the first time and going, aha, I get it.
And also it was probably a feeling that you in second grade had experienced and didn't necessarily have a word for. So it's that thing of how books can become containers, not only, a place to understand our melancholy, but also a place to understand like you said, our own emotions, but other people's emotions too. And so if you read something difficult that is happening to, if Opal's mother, and Because of Winn Dixie, this is not a spoiler alert, is not there. She left. And you, as a young reader, you might be reading that in the safety of your own home with two parents, but what it does is it lets you imagine somebody else's grief. And so it's that empathy part, empathy not only for yourself, but for other people. It makes your heart bigger.
And that is so important right now, I think, this idea of empathy and having kids have access to books that not only entertain them and provide them, joy and something fun to do, but that can really expand for them and to show this is our world and this is how we can exist in it with anyone and with everyone. And, you have many characters in your work where it's like, well, maybe I wouldn't want to always hang out with that person, and yet I can understand them a little bit more.
Right. No, it's so funny. It makes me think like Flora and Ulysses, the story of the squirrel and the vacuum cleaner and the girl who loves comics and her friend William Spiver. And I get kids who write and say, I'm glad that I got to meet William Spiver, but I wouldn't want to sit next to him at lunch necessarily, and so it's exactly what you said. It's just like it expands your world and it helps you understand difficult people in real life and to approach them with more empathy, I think.
And you also get a great, I remember being a kid and I feel like this is such a fun thing for kids of having that community when all of your friends are like reading the same book and you can be like, what did you think of this part or that character? And sometimes you find someone has an idea completely different than what you had.
I know. It's like, I don't know, it was some point this year I was walking behind two kids who were like talking about a book that they were reading. I had no idea what the book was. And like, it was two girls and they were like hopping up and down and like saying, no. Oh, I knew that was did you think that was going to happen? And it was so thrilling I was walking the dog behind them and I just felt so honored to hear them totally in a book together and talking about it. And so excited. It brings you together, right? To talk about a book that you love.
And no one will give you a more honest opinion on a book or anything than, a group of kids. They'll really tell you like exactly what they thought of the characters and the plot. Like they'll tell you. They
will. And it's a beautiful thing about writing for kids is just you never have to worry about whether or not they're going to be honest with you. It's great.
And sometimes I'm sure they say some very funny and interesting things. I can't imagine getting to like sit with a group of kids and be like, to like commune with them about the book, but also just like to hear in person what they really thought about it.
It's fantastic. And it's also like, I'm thinking about a letter that I got, this is a long time ago, and it was about Winn Dixie, which is the only thing that we keep on coming back to it. But it was funny because one of these kids, it was a group of, it was like a third grade classroom and they all wrote letters and one of them wrote about how they read the book together and they were all in it together. And her favorite part was when Dixie had puppies, which of course does not happen. But it's that thing of you can see how a reader has entered the world and made it their own. And so I am never going to correct a kid about what they say happened in the book because you're in it and experiencing it your own way. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's thrilling to watch a kid make a book their own.
Yeah, I can only imagine sort of the satisfaction and fun of getting those responses and also being like, okay, yeah, this is maybe they're experiencing things that you never would have imagined out of the book. Right? But yeah, that's incredible to say, I put something out there and I thought these things, but it's so much bigger than I could have even imagined.
Right. And it goes to that thing where ask, and usually it's the teacher that asks this, what did you mean? What was the symbolism? And it's like, you know what? I don't know, but it's not my book anymore. It's your book. What my intentions were, I wrote my heart, and you keep on and you bring your heart to it, and that's the thing. It's just like I never want to talk. Or the other question that gets asked a lot: what lesson did you mean to impart? If I'm gonna teach a lesson, I would fail miserably. I'm telling a story. Although I always like to think about Mercy Watson, the pig, as the answer to what lesson did you mean to impart? Because nobody ever learns anything in those books. She's just a pig.
She's like toast. Just a pig. I think that's something that comes, they think that there's like two schools of books for kids. There's the just pure entertainment, the adventures, whatever, which are great and wonderful and also teach lessons or teach things. And then they think there's like educational, real books. And it's like, well, that's simply not true. There's so much merit in all of it. And you have to read all of it to really fully get an understanding for what's out there. And you can't just say, oh, this book is for fun and this is for not. Like, that's not how it works.
That is so true. And I'm glad that you brought it up. And that makes me think about my mother and how she paid attention to me all the time as a reader. She didn't make me read anything, but she followed what I was interested in, and she got those books in my hand, everything from a biography of Abraham Lincoln when I was in second grade to Cricket in Times Square, to Paddington. And so it was just like when adults say to me, how do I make my kid read? I always say, one, the number one thing is to remind them what a joy and a privilege it is to let them see you reading for your own pleasure, and just to pay attention and to follow them and facilitate what they want to read. It doesn't matter what it is. Get it in their hands.
Especially now when there's such a wide range of really incredible stuff. And then you've got graphic novels, you've got audiobooks, there's so much great opportunity now. Because I think I'm a wholehearted believer that there's a perfect book for every person. Some people just might take a little bit more time to find out what that thing actually is.
Right. And I, as a former bookseller myself, I can testify to the thrill of being able to put a book in a kid's hands. Like, what did you like? Okay, then you'll like this. Or Louis Sachar's Holes. Mm-hmm. I remember being a bookseller then, and I would have desperate mothers come in and say, this is the first book that my child has read. I need another book just like it.
You're like, there is no other book.
That's right. That's what I always said. Good luck. There's no other book like it. I would give them the Westing game. But there isn't anything quite like it. But yay, because just pay attention. You don't have to get another book exactly like that book. You just have to say, okay, this is funny. It's unpredictable. Let's move into another book that is kind of like that. Just keep on feeding them books. So,
yes, yeah. Absolutely. And for kids that they've gone through all these different stages. It's so great. When I used to work in a bookstore as well, I would always be like, looking at the kids' hands to see what they had, to be like, what are you all reading these days? Because it can change so quickly.
Don't you do that out in the world still? Yes. There's just not anybody that I walk by with a book where I am not trying to figure out what it is. And, and I, when I'm on an airplane, I'm always like, I like to make sure that I go to the bathroom at least once so I can walk down the aisle and see what people are doing. Lots of people are reading.
Absolutely. When I'm on the subway here in New York, I'm constantly like, I'm sure people think I'm very strange, sometimes for a variety of reasons, but often because I'm just trying to crane my neck to see if I can see the book that someone's reading.
Right. Yep. That's me too. Yeah.
Do you feel that there's a difference in the world of children's publishing from when you started work to now? Do you think that they're asking for different things or looking for different things, or are you just putting it out and saying, this is what I write?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, when I say to people who are trying to get published, there's no point in writing to the market because you have to write your heart. And the same way that when I started and didn't know what I was doing, because when I started in 2000, I remember somebody saying to me, "Oh, it's a shame that that it's a novel. You know, fiction for kids is not what's big right now. It's picture books." But you know what changed? You know what changed, because I was still at the warehouse, the book distributor, when a pallet, and for people who, you know, like a pallet filled with one title, one middle grade novel title in hardcover. And usually we served the whole upper Midwest at that warehouse. And usually when a new middle grade novel in hardcover came out, we would get maybe 60 copies. And this was a whole pallet, so 1,000 copies. And I remember us all standing around in the warehouse looking at it, thinking somebody had made a mistake and, you know, hit the wrong key as they ordered. But that was Harry Potter. That was the first Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I think that changed everything for all of us. And lucky me that I happened to, you know, be writing as those books came out.
And now I think there's so much, when I look at kids' books now and I see things that I can't remember seeing when I was a kid, there's horror books and there's these great mysteries. And like, I know those things existed, I'm sure, when I was a child, but I think there's just so much more opportunity now for a wider range, for a more diverse range of fiction. And that's very exciting to see as well.
It totally is. And you were talking about graphic novels, which is something that has totally changed in the time that I've been doing this, and legitimate, like it is literature, you know, and that idea that people are going, okay. And you talked about audiobooks, and guess what? That's reading too, you know, because it's like, sometimes I'll say to an adult, well, I can only make him listen. He won't read books. I'll only listen to him. It's like, great. That's reading, you know, that's story. It's all good. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all there. And there's so many places to find you're in. And I always think too, all it takes is one. Maybe you love one graphic novel and then you find out that it's actually based on a traditional novel, and you can go there. You know, you never know what's going to lead to the next thing, especially for kids, because they're curious, they're insatiable. Once they get going, they don't want to stop.
And let me just pick up there, Jenna, for a minute on you never know where they're going to find the thing, because this is this is at the top of my brain right now, because my brother was just visiting, and he and I both had, and when we were growing up, the same English teacher in 10th grade, and she read us Tale of Two Cities out loud, you know, in the classroom. And I'm rereading that book now. And he and I were both talking about how pivotal that was for us to hear that story, how it changed so much for us. And I'm thinking, when you're saying you can find in a graphic novel, I'm sure there's a graphic novel of Tale of Two Cities. And then if you back up and go to the actual novel, and it just like it's worlds expanding upon worlds. So the big shout out that I want to do is that reading aloud and how it changes. It creates community when a teacher does that. 2, it makes that safe place. And 3, it introduces you to things in a way that you wouldn't get any other way. And you're listening communally. And it's a really powerful experience.
I think the best great example of that I have is Shakespeare. I mean, I'm someone who loves Shakespeare, and I hear all the time from people that it doesn't work for them. And I go, have you ever seen it performed? Have you ever seen it live?
That's it, right? And, you know, and this is something else that my brother and I were talking about. It's just like, people think they're not going to understand it, right? Shakespeare is, you know, and once you see it's for people, you know, then it's like, and that's what reading aloud can do. That's what's going and watching somebody perform something. It's like, oh no, this is for me, you know?
And there's no right or wrong way, I think, to consume it or to understand it. Or, you know, I read things all the time and I hear somebody better and smarter say, this was in there. And I go, I never would have known that was in there, but that's okay because I enjoyed it just the same.
Right. No. And that goes all the way back to writing and what I intended, because I remember doing my very first school visit with Because of Winn Dixie, and I was up in front of the class, and the teacher said, okay, here's the person who wrote the book, and we're going to talk about the themes in the book. And I thought, what are those, And the kids and the teacher then worked together and listed the themes, which I could see once they like pointed them out. And then I used them going forward. I'm like, okay, let's talk about the themes in this book. But I had no idea, and that's what communal discussions do. And yeah, you and I could talk for like 6 or 7 hours. So, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
But, yeah.
We absolutely could. I wonder, moving forward now to where we are at in your career, you've got some new things coming out or are out. This series of almost fairy tale like books. We've got the Puppets of Spelhorst and Hotel Balzar, and you're working with some incredible illustrators on these projects as well. And I was wondering if you'd just talk a little bit about sort of the inception of this and these books, because they are incredible. They are gorgeous. They are wonderful.
It's where to start, because I want to give a shout out to these amazing artists, because it is such a collaboration. And it's one of those things, and this is the beautiful thing about writing for kids, is like you write the words and then the artists come along and amplify and deepen and broaden it. And they're just, I'm going to hold them up. I know that it's that when you put, so like unbelievable art. And the inception, I started, I wrote the puppets. Gosh, it was just so much fun to do, because it's kind of like a novella, right? So, and so it was like, wow, that was great. And I didn't intend to do a second one, but then the pandemic came. And I remember exactly where I was walking in the neighborhood when I thought, what do I need? I need another fairy tale. I need a fairy tale that, and so this one is definitely a product of that. And then I thought, oh, well, it's fairy tales, and that means threes, right? It has to be 3. So then I started work on the third one to get through the pandemic, to be able to have these stories to keep me company. To give meaning to my days, to watch this incredible art from, Julie Morstead and Julia Sarda roll, and it just it was everything, and so I hope that readers feel that kind of same magic and comfort and wonder, because that's what the artists do with these stories.
When you were saying that when people ask you about writing books for adults, these books for me, yes, I would have loved them as a kid, but now even as an adult, reading through them is something really special. They just click. They just feel like they reach something that feels so timeless. And there's these stories that, yes, they're maybe showing us different things about humanity, and they're expanding our minds, but they just also feel like I'm reading a fairy tale that someone would have handed me in like a big tome when I was a kid.
Oh, what a beautiful compliment. It actually kind of makes me tear up to hear that, because it's always that thing where no matter what I'm writing for that kid in me. And so to think about me getting to read these when I was a kid, it's kind of like a dizzying kind of feeling, but it's like, yeah, it was such a gift to be able to do them, and then such a gift to have these artists. It is like I wish we could just do nothing but talk about the art, and the third one is going to be just as incredible. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about who's doing the third one. Do you know?
I don't know if it's out in the world. So
So I'm probably not supposed to say. Okay, all right, I won't. I wanted to say something else about timelessness, and I know what it was. It was when the puppets came out. I had people coming to signings without without children because of the puppets, which is really interesting. It was just like that book spoke to, like you said, something in adults too. I don't know.
It's a book that you could imagine like finding on a shelf in a little store somewhere and just being sort of drawn in. And the first time I opened it, I said, I'm just going to leaf through this. And then I read the whole thing.
There was one guy who came to a signing. This was actually at a Barnes and Noble. I remember exactly the room that I was in and how it was set up and everything. And he said, this is one of the few books that will stay on my shelf. And do you know where it will stay? And I said, no. It's right next to The Little Prince. That's how it made me feel. And it's just like, it undid me when you said that. Am I the luckiest person in the world? Yes.
Getting to tell stories that will stay with people and that you imagine they may pass down or that they'll tell someone about, and they'll say, I just have to tell you about this. I mean, is there anything more human than storytelling? And to get to do those things, I mean, that's got to be incredible.
It is. And I mean, and that goes from like where we started this conversation with you as a second grader reading the book over and over, all the way to like, yes, exactly that. It's what and it goes to that thing of whether it's you as a second grader or the grown man in the line, it's like it's this beautiful thing of being able to connect deeply to people because of stories. That thing, like you said, that it is the most deeply human thing of all. And I say that sometimes when I'm talking to writers, it's just like, don't worry about making it perfect, because perfect is not what we need. What we need is humane. And so this is a job for humans. You bring your whole broken, beautiful self to it.
I think something in your work that comes through so well and is something I definitely felt with Puppets and Hotel Balzar is the reader is able to put themselves in and get something back from what they're reading. You don't just have a story told to you. You're putting some of yourself into that book, into those characters, and then you're able to get something back.
It's a beautiful point, because they say with the science of it that that's how empathy actually, that's how your brain gets wired for empathy. That thing, what that happens when you put yourself in the story. And then it becomes a collaborative thing, which goes back to, it doesn't matter what I was thinking when I was writing it, because it's you and me together in this story. And I say that to kids sometimes when I write them back. It's just like, it doesn't matter if we ever meet. We've met through stories. We're together in that story. Yeah.
That's really something special, I think, in literature across the board, but something specific about literature for children, because it just has a different thing when you're saying to a young person, like, this is for you.
Right. And, and it stays with you. I worked in a used bookstore, and I would sometimes have adults come in desperately searching for a book that they remembered from when they were a kid. And if you could find that book for them, the physical reaction was like it almost knocked them off their feet. It is to get kids as readers, it stays with you for the rest of your life. It is a life-changing thing. To wit, here you are doing this work, because you're a reader. So.
Oh yeah, it still happens. I'll see Winn Dixie, I'll see The Giver, I'll see Bridge to Terabithia, and I'm like, immediately in those moments again.
And I was working at the book warehouse when The Giver came out, and I remember reading it. That was like, that's a life-changing book too, just absolutely life-changing. And so is Bridge to Terabithia, which I read in the warehouse too, because it acknowledges grief.
Those are books that I say, and along with many of yours, those are books I say when people question what kids can handle or that they might not be, I'm like, The Giver is like so intense for kids.
Yes. Yes. And you know what? It's also that thing of like kids will take what they need and then they will come back. And I find this with myself as a reader, you know, like because I've been doing I started this in the pandemic, rereading things. And I find that, you know, rereading it at 58, I'm getting something totally different from it. We as readers take what we need, you know.
Absolutely. Well, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about your literary influences since we're here. Either on things, you know, for kids that you really love, or just as in general, as Kate DiCamillo reader, some things that you really love.
You know, when I think of myself and define myself, the first word that comes into my head is not writer, but reader. It was when I understood who I was in the world, was standing in the public library in Claremont, Florida, and the library telling me that I was a true reader. And it's like, okay, yep, that's who I am. And when I was a kid, I read everything. You know, if it was a book, it met my criteria, except for Charlotte's Web, because I read Black Beauty. And I thought, man, no more books with animals on the cover after that. And I would look at Wilbur's face and think, I'm afraid of what's going to happen to the pig.
That was me after Where the Red Fern Grows.
Right? It's like I can't. And the irony is, I think almost every book that I have has an animal on the cover. So I wouldn't, you know, once I was 9 years old, that was it. It was just like I was terrified, you know. I was okay with like, I remember reading Ralph S. Mouse. I mean, clearly, I remember the cover of that and everything looked like it was going to be fine there. So I read my way through childhood, and then I had this beautiful experience of you know, becoming adult reader, but then turning back into somebody who's reading books for kids as an adult when I got that job in the warehouse. So Bridge to Terabithia, The Giver, Lewis Sackire, Holes, Watson's Go to Birmingham, all of those things. So that had been published since I was a kid, and then I read them as an adult, and they really, really influenced me. And as an adult reader now, I read widely. I love short stories. I love novels. I'm going back and doing a lot of rereading of novels that I love. Tale of Two Cities. And I'm also reading Howard's End right now because I had just reread Zadie Smith's On Beauty, and I realized I'd never read Howard's End, which she had based that book on. So that's the kind of reader I am. Everything, and it all informs and shapes me. I was just aware as I was reading Tale of Two Cities of like stealing something from Dickens the next morning as I was writing. It's like, okay, where is that coming from? And it's just like, you know, just that kind of, so and that's another piece of advice I always give to writers. First thing you can do, read. Yeah.
Favorite moments through your career of like just like great events or perfect interactions that you're like, oh, this is the thing I always tell people, like tell writers to get them to be like, there's great things on the way.
I have had so many gifts of connecting with readers at events. Like I could do like 20, but the one that my mind always goes to is I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the question and answer, we were in a big auditorium, and a kid stood up. He was maybe 9 years old, and he said, I'm dyslexic, and this book, and he held up Tale of Despereaux. I never do this without crying, and said, this is the first book that I read on my own, and I wanted to know, are you dyslexic? Did you write it for kids like me? And something about that, just like I had to bend over, not to cry, and gather myself and say to him, I'm not dyslexic, but I wrote that story from my broken heart, and you brought your heart, and we met, and that to me is the miracle of doing this. But to have him say, for readers like me. And it's just like, yes, it is for a reader like you, even though we're very different, it's still the same thing. We're bringing our broken selves and we're meeting here in this book. So I think about that moment a lot, and the honor of it, and also um, the community and responsibility of it, because we're all holding each other.
And there's something so special about the community of readers and writers, and when we can all come together, and even though it's full of people that are incredibly different in so many ways and across the entire world, and have all these experiences, and yet we can all look at these same books and say, yes, that was for me.
Yeah, right. Isn't it beautiful? It's a beautiful thing and really moving.
And especially when we can look and, sometimes I like to ask authors sort of about their perfect readers or who they hope finds these books. And I feel like we've talked about that, through this entire thing about people who you hope find the book. But who I hope finds your books are just those people who are looking, like you said, to see themselves and to see something bigger in what they read.
And I get asked a lot, what do you hope that readers, when they close the book, what do they feel? And I always have the same answer, loved.
And I know that readers will find that in your books. And so I can't wait for people to get their hands on it. Any age, kids, adults, anyone in between, there's something to be found in the works of Kate DiCamillo, especially, I have to say, some of my favorites, Because of Winn Dixie, The Puppets of Spelhorst, Hotel Balzar, this third book in this series that we can't wait for. I can't wait for people to get their hands on all of them. But Kate DiCamillo, thank you so much for talking with me about books today.
I am so appreciative of you. And I mean, like I said, we could go on for 6 or 7 more hours. And it has been such an honor. And I have that feeling that I always have, like, that this was such, I feel like, what a good conversation. So thank you for conversing with me. I feel grateful to you. And let's be grateful to Ramona the dog, too, yes. Because we thought that she was going to bark at the mailman through this, and the mailman has not shown up. And so we made it through the whole thing without Ramona, coming in like Fantastic Mr. Fox. Do you remember that Fantastic Mr. Fox?
Yes.
That's the way Ramona is. So, yeah. Thank you, Ramona.
Thank you, Ramona.
Jenna.
Thank you.
Hello, readers. It's time for another special TBR Top Off. We are going to talk about a couple of our favorite books from the wonderful, wonderful Kate DiCamillo. I'm Mark at my Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, but I'm going to let one of our mega fans take off and start us off with things, and that is Donald in the Detroit area. Donald, let's kick it off. We love Kate.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to say that Kate DiCamillo is probably one of the best, most original, versatile, exciting kids authors that has ever lived, right? And there's so many great authors that write in the kids and young reader age groups. But adults, I want to speak really to all the adults who watch and listen to our podcast, that you need to be reading this author's books. These are some of the best books that you could also give as gifts, and that could be, great for inspiration. And I mean, it just covers everything. I could just go on and on. But I've got 2 for you. One is a classic, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Let's just say it's about a rabbit that gets lost. And if you're somebody out there that struggles with, your identity, you struggle with your place in the world, you're wondering where you belong, what does love mean, how do you love back, possession, and like anything at all the feelings, right? Feelings. This is going to address that. This is going to make you as an adult or your child understand what it's like to be unique, an individual, somebody who is trying to find who they are, and it's going to be so accessible, right? You're going to sit there and read this in one sitting, and you're then going to want to go to the bookstore and find more by her. So I also wanted to quickly talk about one of her more recent ones that came out last year, The Puppets of Spelhorst. Again, this is a little bit more of a fairy tale, a little bit more of a picture book as well. It's got, I mean, oh my God, it's amazing artistry and pictures in here. But again, it's a tale that, again, talks about freedom, talks about individuality, family, what it's like to be part of a community even. Like, I mean, anything that you're thinking about, struggling with, trying to identify or understand in our world today, Kate DiCamillo can speak to it in one, if not 1,000 different ways. And so these two books, again, Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, got to have this one. But you're also going to want to pick up The Puppets of Spelhorst. Just give them as gifts, read them yourself, slip them into somebody's backpack as you're walking on the sidewalk. I don't care. Put them into their hands. So, Mark, what do you have for us with this Kate DiCamillo dive-in?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, like slipping something into somebody's backpack like a total stranger is, I think, my new goal in life is to be a one-man lending library. So get ready, folks. Kate, we love so much. It was a little tricky to pick a very favorite, but I went with the very first book of hers that I read, and that is The Tale of Despereaux. Oh, it is lovely. This has made its way into every one of my nieces and nephews' home libraries. Every young person in my life is going to read this book, no matter what. It follows four characters, essentially. It's told in almost four stories that could be their own, but the way they get braided together as the book goes on is just pretty much perfect. And it's these four characters whose paths converge. And I don't want to get too into plot points, but I will just talk about how the book makes you feel and the things that you can take away from pretty much any of Kate's writing. So you have adventure, of course. It's sort of a fantastical tale in a castle. Bravery, of course, is right at the forefront. But really, it is a book that has themes of forgiveness and curiosity and family and courage. The structure of the book works really, really well, and I think feels just different enough from a narrative structure that a lot of young readers would consume. So it sort of changes the game in a way that I think perks up their ears and eyes. The book is also so charming. It's so smart. And really the language just absolutely begs you to read this book out loud, which I highly encourage. Read it to your loved ones. Read it to a child. Read it to your spouse. Read it to your grandmother. It's just a book that sings. And I think it's one of those perfect books that you can, again, read in a sitting when you just need a little pick-me-up, when you need a little whimsy in your life, and when you need to be reminded that the world is good. And Kate is always really, really wonderful at conveying all of these deep, profound truths that we all have to embrace as adults and distilling it down into these lovely, simple ways that children can consume and then grow with. We could do this all day. But yes, Tale of Despereaux, please check it out. It's fantastic, as is all of her body of work. But that is all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. I'm Mark, and you can follow my home store at BN Westchester. Donald, where can we find you?
You can follow me at BN Fairlane Green.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.